Welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Delmar Chabad Center, and once again we'd like to dedicate another show to the role of the Jewish woman. Why we talked about this in the past and like to talk about it again, and of course in a different capacity. The reason is because I think this may be the biggest stumbling block, maybe the biggest question, as myself and other rabbis get, is just that aren't the Jewish women second-rate citizens? Don't they have to sit, so to speak, in the back of the synagogue or back of the bus, so to speak? Very prejudiced, very isolated. There's no role, a good role for the Jewish woman. The women say we don't want to have anything part of it. Jewish men will say, this is not for me, it's not the proper modern attitude that women have a second-rate role. Maybe that's something that happened thousands of years ago, but we're in a modern liberal society, and women are just as equal to men. So this is probably the major question, if I had to rate the questions that I get, and I would put number one on it, and therefore I think it is worth to addressing and approaching it from many different angles, because that it has to be addressed, because it really, and let's get to the bottom line, it really is a misnomer. Jewish women, and I'm talking about traditional, the Orthodox view, are not second-rate, they're not second-class citizens at any case, and it's very important for us to realize this. And in this article from, and I'd like to just tell you the source because it's important. It's called the Yiddish Heim. It's Yiddish or Jewish. It means the Jewish home. It's a publication by women, written by women in a Hasidic viewpoint. So they're not illiterate. No one's keeping them ignorant. Jewish women are just as smart as men, we all know, and they can be just as learned as men, and that's why we'd like to talk about this particular viewpoint and angle of the Jewish woman, the idea of learning Torah. Many people get the impression from, maybe it's from Fiddler on the Roof, of course many people have seen that, it's just the Jewish man is supposed to be learning Torah, and the Jewish woman in that movie and play was just to sit home making challahs and cleaning up. Well, again, this is just a misnomer. Of course, Fiddler on the Roof is a novel. It's not a true depiction of what really Torah life is. I hope that's why I just don't want anybody to get the wrong impression of Judaism than from something that someone just thought up very nicely. And what it is, the truth is that Jewish men do learn, of course, but Jewish women also learn. And it'd be very interesting to note that Jewish men help out in the household, and maybe more than men that are not, so to speak, quote-unquote Orthodox or traditional. They help out with their family, help out with the kids, help out at home, and therefore this idea that men learn and women work in the household is really a mistake. And therefore, let's get into this article. It's the Torah revolution among Jewish women, and therefore we're going to see, it's actually excerpted from the talk from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson in Brooklyn, and we'll see about the real viewpoint of the role of the Jewish woman. The Torah is the heritage of the entire Jewish people. That includes men, women, and children. Although the obligation to study Torah study belongs primarily to Jewish men, nevertheless the Torah's preservation throughout the ages can be attributed as much or more to Jewish women as to their husbands and sons. Actually, this woman's preeminence in relation to the Torah dates back when Hashem the Almighty gave us the Torah 3,300 years ago. Before God's revelation to the entire Jewish people at Mount Sinai, He told Moshe to prepare them for it. First He had to speak to the women, and only then to the men. So, quote from Shmos, Exodus, so shall you say to the house of Jacob. This means the women, say our sages, for the women is the basis of the home. And you shall tell it to the children, literally sons of Israel. This means the men. From the different Hebrew words used for saying to the women and telling to the men, our sages also learned that the Almighty told them to speak to the women gently and to the men more strictly. Every detail of our Torah is precise, teaching each generation lessons to apply to the specific conditions of the era in order to serve Hashem better, the Almighty better. The fact that He told Moshe to speak to the women before the men shows us that although it is primarily the men's duty to study the Torah, yet it is the women who are the vital factor in determining the Torah eternal survival among our people. For it is women wives and mothers who ensure the continuity of Torah study among the men by giving their strong support and enthusiasm. Similarly, although the primary legal halakhic obligation of educating both boys and girls rests upon the father, in practice it is difficult or impossible without the mother. Throughout the Shalosh Shnei Luchos Bris by Rabbi Isaiah Horowitz, who lived in the 1500s and into the 1600s, rules that women are commanded to reprimand their children just as fathers are, and even more than them, because they are available and spend more time in the home. Actually, the mother's educational contribution has the distinct advantage over the father's. Hashem told Moshe to speak to the women gently, because he endowed them with a nature far gentler than men's. In his wisdom, the Creator had implemented in the woman the gentler nature that is so vital for her God-given vocation of bringing up the children with the fondness and love that children need. In recent years especially, we see in practice how the positive approach to educating children has proved the most successful. And this is where the women can make their most striking contribution. In recent generations, as the standards of Yiddishkeit Judaism have declined, it has been women who have maintained their family standards of Torah and mitzvahs as much or more than man. Regardless of a father's superior Torah knowledge and meticulousness in observing mitzvos, it has usually been the mother's strong commitment to Yiddishkeit and enthusiasm in observing it that has given her children a better chance to grow up similarly committed, especially in cases where she had been at least moderately knowledge of Torah. It is no secret that some sages of the Talmud did not encourage formal Torah education for girls, particularly study of the oral Torah, which means the Mishnah, the Gemara, the Talmud, which explains all the details and provides the underlying logic for the written Torah. Studying Torah raises the student to a high level of intellectual sophistication, for which those sages felt most women were not ready. Formal learning for women, they felt, could lead many to deviousness, to usual rational process required in Torah study for frivolous purposes and excuses, not to fulfill Torah laws as specified. Other sages, however, disagreed with that halachic viewpoint and recommended that Jews teach their daughters Torah. But even the sages who disapproved of teaching girls Torah did not prohibit it. On the contrary, besides the rules of these mitzvahs that apply to women, which they are required to learn, the halacha states that women do receive divine reward when they study other areas of Torah that they do not have to learn. In fact, throughout the ages there have been outstanding women who were respected Torah scholars. However, these have been notable exceptions, not the rule. Traditionally, the opinion discouraging teaching the Torah to women has predominated. In practice, few women had formal Torah learning. For thousands of years, daughters learned how to observe mitzvos, commandments, by learning from and observing their mothers. Grandmothers and older sisters are respected women in the community. Many were taught to read Hebrew to enable them to read the prayers, but that was often the limit to their book learning. The halachic obligation that women do have is to know the practical details of all mitzvahs that are required to keep. Actually, the majority of the mitzvahs of the Torah. They include all mitzvahs that apply specifically to women, like rules of marital life, immersion in the mikveh, all positive mitzvahs not limited by a set time, which are the majority of positive mitzvahs, all Torah rabbinical prohibitions, which are many more in number than the positive mitzvahs, such as the rules of Shabbos, kosher, and so on. And as the Rebbe has often observed, it would be wonderful if all men would be expert in all these laws that women are required to know. However, knowledge of how to observe these mitzvahs did not require actual book knowledge. In practice, book knowledge of the mitzvahs was rare among women throughout most of our history. They observed and absorbed all details necessary for keeping these mitzvahs in the home and extended family environment. The Gemara notes that women contribute to the exalted mitzvah of Torah study by taking their children to Torah school and awaiting their husband's return from the Beis Medrash house of learning. By giving their husbands and children the necessary encouragement and assistance to enable them to study Torah, the women too participate in their menfolk's exalted merit and divine reward. During the past 3/4 of a century, this situation has radically changed. The opinion to which most Jewish communities today subscribe and practice is that one permits teaching Torah to girls and women. It is not, of course, the Torah that has changed, God forbid. It is simply that our Torah's eternal principles must be reapplied to the changing circumstances and needs of every era. Sweeping changes in general society have so deeply affected the Jewish community that a change approved by the Torah itself has become necessary in our approach to teaching Torah to women. In the past, Gentile nations have been predominantly illiterate. Jews, however, were unique in that most of our men were basically literate, as were many women. But the enormous advances in science and economic standards during the past century and a half have brought vast changes in all areas of society, particularly education. Most lands where Jews live have long instituted compulsory education, and their populations have become literate. The virtual and universal introduction of compulsory secular education deeply affected the Jewish community. Even in Eastern Europe, where most boys continue to learn at the traditional cheder schools and yeshivos, their sisters often studied at public schools, absorbing the prevailing non-Jewish language and secular culture. Ignorant of in-depth knowledge of authentic Torah values and its intellectual rationale, some Jewish girls began to question their ancestral tradition and to adopt secular ideas. Some were unfortunately overwhelmed by the revolutionary euphoria sweeping the new literate and emancipated European masses who were beginning to realize their power. Even Jewish girls not seriously harmed by these trends still became literate in their local non-Jewish language and wide open to observe the non-Jewish, known non-Torah ideas and influence of secular reading material. It was to counteract these negative forces that with the blessing of the greatest Torah leaders, including the revered Belzer and Ger Rebbeim and the Chafetz Chaim, far-sighted women founded Jewish schools for girls to learn the Torah and its eternal outlook on life, realizing that only for Torah could be the true antidote to the attractions of secular ideas. The newly established Jewish girls' schools began to restrain the flood of assimilation from wreaking further havoc upon the safe haven of the Jewish home. It is true that in previous generations schools for Jewish girls were considered unnecessary, even undesirable. During the present century, however, Torah leaders of all communities, even the strictest, have approved and encouraged their establishment. These wonderful schools have since proved their worth thousands of times over, with every Jewish girl who has graduated to later build a Jewish home. These schools have been the crucial element in building the Jewish home throughout the world. They have been outstandingly successful in teaching traditional Torah values and details of Jewish practice, channeling their students' natural curiosity and enthusiasm into Torah study. And the girls have been outstandingly successful in transmitting what they have learned to their children and others. Without them, Jewish life today would be inconceivable. There will be no Jewish present and certainly no future, God forbid. Girls' schools have become so natural and integral to every Torah-observant community that many are amazed to learn that they originally aroused a storm of controversy. Many well-meaning but short-sighted Jews saw them as serious departure from the traditions of our ancestors who had given girls no formal schooling. But the great Torah leader spoke out unequivocally that such reservations were no longer valid. Many echoes of this controversy recur in the halakhic literature of the time. To Chafetz Chaim's comments, it seems that all this was valid only in previous times, when everyone's ancestral tradition was very strong, to influence one to act in the way trodden by one's ancestors. Now, however, through our many sins, the ancestral tradition has become weak, especially for those women who have become accustomed to learning the non-Jewish alphabet and language. It is certainly a great mitzvah to teach them Chumash, and also the prophets and the ethical teachings of our sages, so that they should be convinced of the truth of our holy faith. In the letter in 1933, half a year before his passing, the Chafetz Chaim spoke out very strongly on behalf of these schools. When I heard that God-fearing people had volunteered to establish in these towns Beis Yaakov schools to teach their Torah and fear of God, virtuous and respectful conduct to Jewish girls, I congratulated their praiseworthy project, for this is a great and urgent matter in our time, when the flood of anti-Torah beliefs exists in full force. For everyone who feels fear of God in his heart, it is a mitzvah to send his daughter to learn at this school. All fears and reservations concerning the prohibition to teach one's daughter Torah have no place whatsoever these days. Here is not the right place to explain at length that the present generations are not like the previous ones. In previous times, every Jewish home had the tradition of fathers and mothers to enable them to walk in the path of the Torah in our religion, whereas in our generations it is not so. Therefore, with all our spiritual power, we must strive to increase the number of these schools and to save whatever we can. And Rabbi Zalman Saraskin, Lusker Rabbi, later head of Israel Moetzes Gedolia Torah and Yeshiva, writes in a response of education of the girls in a Torah spirit through study of Torah arouses worry and apprehension in the hearts of those who are sincere, only because it is new, because they have not seen their ancestors doing it that way. But the present generations are not like the previous generations. In previous generations, Jewish homes were conducted in accordance with the Shulchan Aruch, the code of law, and one could learn the whole Torah there by actually experiencing it. But now it is already impossible to learn the Torah in Jewish homes, and a Jewish girl who comes from one of these homes to a religious school must be of necessity be taught Torah. He brings a proof from the era of the first base of Mikdash, the first temple, during the reign of King Chezkiyahu, where all men and women, boys and girls, were expert in the most complicated laws. From the Gemara it is evident that even women had studied and become familiar with these subjects, although the laws did not necessarily apply to them. The reason, says Rabbi Saraskin, was because Torah education had been suppressed by serious persecution during the previous generations, and now Chezkiyahu had to take drastic measures to revive it. That the Almighty approved of his special measures is clear, for he wished to make Chezkiyahu the Mashiach, as the Gemara says there. Eventually, despite the original opposition to formal Torah schooling for girls, all Torah communities, without exception, instituted schools to teach girl Torah values and how to observe mitzvahs in practice. In fact, virtually all these schools go much further. Besides teaching Tanakh, the written Torah, which form a halakha perspective, is more acceptable to teach women than the oral law, like the Rambam, Maimonides. Most Jewish girl schools also teach to recognize Torah commentaries to these texts. These are considered part of the oral law, which is less acceptable to teach to women, though they may study it on their own. In study of halacha, rules of how to observe mitzvahs, to girls are usually taught not only the bare rules themselves, but also at least the basic internal reasoning within halacha that determines when various halachic rules do or do not apply. For example, principles governing which activities are prohibited or permitted on Shabbos. This too is considered part of the oral Torah. Why do most Jewish girls' schools teach much more Torah than the basic halachic minimum, even venturing deeply into the oral Torah? Because Torah study is the only true antidote to the alien influences that accompany secular studies. Today, girls in any case acquire intellectual sophistication from their compulsory secular studies. It is human nature to enjoy studying much more when we understand it well and can delve into it. Like it or not, Jewish girls and women tend to further develop the secular education they receive at school. By experience or training, they may gain extensive expertise related to a profession, or they may read up on subjects they find interesting to obtain a deeper knowledge. Since women have long reached this point in secular studies, it makes no sense to deny them the same opportunities in the Torah studies. On the contrary, the entire reservation about women studying Torah was because it could make their minds devious. Today, however, women already possess advanced secular knowledge. This serves to develop their minds and had a strong influence on their outlook, producing a good measure of just such deviousness, yet in a secular, non-Torah form. Therefore, this very same halakha principle that was previously a reason to frown upon Torah women learning Torah now dictates that in order to counteract the potential harm of secularly derived deviousness, women be taught as much Torah as possible so that their minds develop within the Torah rather than in a secular framework. Furthermore, it is universally recognized that girls today should also learn subjects that instill religious feeling and devotion and explain the basic foundations of Jewish belief. Women, equally with men, are required to fulfill all 6 mitzvahs that every Jew must observe continuously. Knowledge and belief in God's existence, in His unity, to be overawed by Him, to love Him, not to consider His other beings as divine, and not to incline towards non-Torah opinions or physical temptations. These commandments are not the easiest to observe, especially today when the pressure of secular ideas and earthly temptations are so strong. It is essential that young people properly understand the Torah's basic outlooks and belief, particularly through studies of Chassidus. Besides the benefits of this extra Torah study for women themselves, it is also highly beneficial for their children's education. Unfortunately, most fathers today do not have adequate time each evening to review their children's Torah study with them. They usually have time to test them only on Shabbos, the Sabbath. Even then, it is a test which children may find intimidating. On the other hand, when their mother helps them with their homework, or even just asks what they learned today at school, her warmth interest not only does not intimidate, but is more likely to arouse the children's enthusiasm for Torah. Besides the valuable review the children get out of the Torah they study that day, the review gives their mother, too, the opportunity to study more Torah. This fulfills the prophecy, Eliyahu will return the hearts of the parents through the children. In fact, now that women are so knowledgeable in Torah, this direct participation in their children's Torah study is to be considered part of their halakhic obligation to assist their sons and husbands in their Torah study, for which women also participate in the great reward that God grants their menfolks. In general, the Torah regards later generations being spiritually lower than earlier ones. However, every disadvantage, particularly since it is engineered by divine guidance, has a potential advantage. In this case, although the reason women now study so much Torah is in order to counteract a negative situation, nevertheless, at the same time, we gain the wonderful advantage of all this extra Torah that women study, increasing divine holiness in the world that will help to bring the Messiah. In fact, this is also a taste and a preparation for the era of the Mashiach, when knowledge and wisdom will become widespread, and the earth will be full of knowledge of God as water covers the sea, which applies to women as well to men. Consequently, the Rebbe recently recommended that all women study more Torah. This should include both halachas that apply directly to them and also other Torah subjects. The other subjects he suggested should start with easier ones such as Ein Yaakov, the stories of the Gemara, and the Medrash. Also, homiletic talks about the parts of the Torah that inspires our hearts to come closer to God and His Torah, as our sages tell us. And women should also increase their efforts to encourage and assist their children and their husbands too in their own Torah study. Well, this is just a short little idea, which of course I just want to convey to you because it really is so really important, because I think this, like and I said before, the major problem that people may find in traditional Judaism, that they find, what about the women? Here I went surely to grammar school and high school, college and postgraduate studies. I'm knowledgeable in my field. And here you want me to Torah just to know how to make a bread, make a challah. He says that this is not fulfilling to a woman nowadays. But I just want to say that nowadays it's important to learn the Torah for men and women, and we have to live with the times. And that doesn't mean, God forbid, that there should be a compromise in the Torah principles, but we have to see where the Torah makes a stand, makes a viewpoint, makes a point of telling the Torah that we have to learn the Torah even for women. And maybe it wasn't done so much emphasis, and I underline that word emphasis, in the olden days. But nowadays, because women have such a high level of intellect, then of course, not only should they, but it's really an obligation for them to understand what the Torah has to say. And I hope they take that opportunity. Of course, we always give the opportunity at Chabad Center that women should find that opportunity to learn as much as they can. Well, here's a short story. Everybody loves stories, and hopefully we'll have time to go through it. And this is called The Golden Chain, A Mischievous Child, a Jewish Soul. We were flying to a wedding in Pittsburgh, and our discussion rambled off in different directions with no specific focus. My companion suddenly remembered a Hasidic narrative that he thought would be of interest to me and proceeded to relate it. He recounted that many years ago, during a Chabad leadership of the Rebbe Shalom Dov Ber, who passed away in 1920, and his son, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, who passed away in 1950, was appointed the administrator of the Lubavitcher Educational Network. On one occasion, he was confronted by an unusual disciplinary problem. It seemed that there was one young student who was very precocious, but also very disruptive. One day he had a goat in the closet of the Cheder classroom. The teacher said, oblivious to the new presence, commenced teaching his class the day's lessons. Suddenly a strange, frightening sound was heard emanating from the closet. The entire class was gripped by a paralyzing alarm, fearful that perhaps an otherworldly demon had somewhat infiltrated their simple classroom. This gave way to shrieks and shouts as the children threw down their chairs and began running in every direction. Finally, one child surged to the floor, and in bedlam fashion the other hysterically followed him to escape from the frightening unknown phantom force. The stunned teacher stood petrified, unable to assimilate what had taken place. Summoning up some measure of courage, he cautiously approached the closet to clarify what had taken place. The thumping and loud shrieks slowly lost their ominous. Somehow the sounds had a vague familiarity. With a racing heart and yet with the realization that he must exert his adult authority, he approached the closet and cautiously opened the door, all the while ready to make a hasty withdrawal if necessary. The first moment he was stunned to perceive the vague form of an animal leaping to and fro. Close examination brought the realization that the source of the incredible fear and class disruption was simply a confined goat. Relief now gave way to indignation. Who was responsible for this disturbance of Torah study and total loss of class control and discipline? Inductive logic and discrete questions quickly elicited the fact that the student, A, was responsible for flagrant breach of school rules. The student was immediately confronted and told that the only appropriate punishment was expulsion from the school. Since Rabbi Schneerson was the education administrator, protocol necessitated that the child meet with him to officially learn his penalty. Shaken yet astute, his mind frantically racing to extricate himself from the extreme punishment, the student began to plead with the rabbi. Finally, unable to contain himself, the child blurted out with defensive intensity, "If you expel me, then you are not merely doing this to me, but to my children and to my children's children and their children till the coming of our righteous Messiah." Rabbi Yosef Yitzhak gazed at him reflectively. He sensed that behind the outer facade of mischief and disruption, there existed a capacity for religious sensitivity with great future potential. After an extended period of appropriate discipline, the child was finally reinstated as a student in the school. My companion Rabbi chuckled as he concluded telling the story, and commented how meaningful it was to him in terms of the unknown inner qualities to be found in every Jewish child. The years passed, and my family moved to Crown Heights. One Sukkot, we were asked to host a few members of a family that had come from Israel to the marriage of their daughter in the 770 Eastern Parkway, Lubavitcher headquarters. The wedding was held with due festivity. We had never met the family in its entirety, and so my wife suggested that we have them over for tea and cake. I sat at the head of the table, the bride's father and his sons to my left, and the bride's mother with her daughters on my right. At the extreme end of the table sat the newly married bride and groom. Without any forethought, I began to relate this tale, thinking it would amuse those present, although with some measure of uncertainty about the veracity, the truthfulness of the story. Did it actually take place, or was it the product of a very colorful imagination? I concluded the story and waited for reactions of amused surprise at the child's cleverness in avoiding a harsh penalty. The bride's father leaned forward, pointed to his wife, and with subdued seriousness stated, "That was her father." I turned in my seat stunned. Around that table was that young child's vision of his future. His children, the bride's mother, his children's children, the son and daughters of the bride's parents, and the bride and her husband exemplified the potential for the future beyond till the coming of the righteous Messiah. I have retold this story many times, and it has been inexhaustible in its rich meaning and relevance to all who have heard it. It poignantly conveys the great possible loss and the alienation of any Jewish child, and the great spiritual treasure that can ultimately accrue through the saving of one individual Jewish soul. So again, we talk about two things. We're talking about the Jewish woman today, and also about the potential of every Jewish child. And I hope the Jewish mothers, they should learn Torah, teach it to their children, and we should have a tremendous amount of knowledge, like I say, pervading the world. Thank you very much. Shalom. Welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Delmar Chabad Center, and today we have a very special guest with us, the son of Rabbi Yisrael Rubin, who is the regional director of the Chabad activities of the Capital District. Welcome to the Jewish View, Mendel Rubin.
It's great to be here.
Mendel, you're a yeshiva student, you're a young man, and we wanted to bring you onto the show to tell people about what is the role of the yeshiva student. Many times many people, I'm sure our listeners, have seen The Fiddler on the Roof, and they've seen maybe other, like The Chosen, different, so to speak, Jewish-style films or plays, or if they've read novels about the yeshiva students. And I personally feel that there's a wrong point of view that they're bringing across and expressing, mainly, and it's like I always say, these are novels. They are anyway not historical presentations when you see them, so a person has to sure take them with a grain of salt. But brought you on there to tell people what is the yeshiva student, what do they do during the day, how are they dealing with the outside world, so to speak, like the yeshiva student maybe in The Fiddler on the Roof would just be like, I used the word nebuchal, like just a person who can, people don't know the Yiddish term, it just means like a loser kind of person. And it really isn't a correct depiction of the yeshiva student. And I'd like to start off in saying, just to describe a little bit of your maybe a daily schedule in the yeshiva.
Well, yeshiva is a very intense study environment, and although its hours can seem grueling to an outsider, and people might think, well, so many hours, 7:30 in the morning and 10:30 at night, and all the free time is devoted to study of Torah and promoting Yiddishkeit. Its truth is, it's a wonderful, enjoyable environment. Everyone loves it. The guys are great together, and it's really a great mix of people there. In my class, we have 40 boys, and we study together in yeshiva. We have a teacher who teaches us Talmud, and a teacher who teaches us Chassidic philosophy. We study Chassidic philosophy in the morning, and Talmud during the day. We spend a lot of hours on it. But yeshiva is very enjoyable. Everyone loves yeshiva. The Bachrim love yeshiva. The Bachrim learn a lot of Torah. Most of the days spent in a very intense study schedule. We study with a partner, with chavrusa. It's like one-on-one in a great big study hall. There are hundreds of boys in the study hall, and you study one-on-one with a partner, and we study Gemara that way. You study Gemara that way. You take a Talmud, and you just debate it between each other.
Well, this is very interesting, and we can't even say innovative because it's a style that I'm sure has been going on for thousands of years.
Since Talmud.
But it's an interesting contrast, let us say, to maybe a college student who maybe hears a lecture, goes back, and there's not too much feedback in a lecture hall, and then you just go back into the library, your room, and you sit over a book, and there's really, of course, there's social interaction, but there's not learning interaction as much as, like you say, like practically a whole day that a person would want to interact and talk and learn together with one. Do you feel the advantages of, like we say, the chavrusa, this buddy system, so to speak? It's
very different, and there's a lot of good points to it. First of all, you're with a friend a whole day, and you get to debate the Talmud. You get to get very involved in the Talmud. There are quiet times, like in the library, where you just read the book off to yourself. But in the yeshiva program, most of the day, the time is spent in very intense involvement, and everyone's very into it. The boys argue out and debate it between each other. And it's sort of a peer system. Everyone helps each other out. Like you speak it over with a friend, with your own chavrusa. Chavrusa is a study partner. And you go over the Talmud so many times with your friend, and you discuss it in different commentaries. There's commentaries for thousands and thousands of years on the Talmud. The Talmud's 3,000 years old. And it's very good because it's very challenging, and it's on your own more. The teachers help you out. You go over the teachers, you ask them questions. But it's mostly the students on their own that really get into it.
It's interesting. Well, you say you just told us about the long hours of the day from 7:30 in the morning to 10 o'clock at night, which, of course, for most people, it's not your 9 to 5 job. And again, I'd like to just for our listeners just to contrast this to the modern day college student, because it is important to understand the difference in the yeshiva students is instead of being like let us first of all say an intellectual inferior, we see that there is actually more time in study, even the schedule, we're talking about a daily schedule from 7:30 in the morning till 10. We can go on a local campus and see what time the students wake up. and are ready to learn, which I'm sure is closer to an average of 10 o'clock in the morning. And of course, now we're talking about, and we'll talk about it a little bit later on, a few minutes, is just a difference between January is a month off. From May to September in college is another 3.5, 4 months off. So there's constantly these vacation times in between and 3-day weekends, and even for the best of students, let alone maybe the lesser students who are only learning anyway, maybe a few weeks before their finals. But we're seeing that there's a very intense schedule here, and it's important just that the students enjoy it. Like Mendel's already said immediately, which he probably understands that people would say maybe it's who knows, like a slave market making people learn there. But it is tremendously enjoyable at this schedule.
You said, people have weekends off and months off. Yeshiva is very rigid. We have school all Sunday, regular schedule. And even on Shabbos, even on Saturday, when we don't have regular school, we have a little Hasidic philosophy in the morning before we pray, and then we go pray off in the big shul, big synagogue with everyone. And afternoon, the Rebbe brings the Rebbe, it's a Hasidic gathering with everyone, and all the students are there, and everyone sings together, and it's very joyous. And the Rebbe discusses the relevant Torah portion, or Maimonides, or Torah commentaries, and the relevance to the day. And even Friday afternoons, when yeshiva gives off, all the boys go out in pairs, and they go out to different places in New York. There are those who go to Brighton Beach, to Russian families. There are those who go, visit stores and put on tefillin with people.
Well, this is an important point again. Now, we've just been talking about and really just giving you just a very brief idea of what the yeshiva is doing, at least they're learning. And I don't know, sometimes I try to explain it to people, but I don't know if it can be explained as well as much as really feeling that way or just immersing yourself of what the Talmud is. And to take a novel, for example, English literature, I don't know if it's possible to sit there reading it to each other and discussing it. So, I mean, what people are used to, their English subjects, for example, I don't know if it's possible as much as to understand how much give and take there is. And in Gemara, the only thing maybe like it is law, but even in law school, they don't learn this way. They just read the cases. So it really is a very difficult description to make to a person who's not initiated in this. But besides this, like you're saying, well, there is such intensive learning. Now we're going to the next step of free time, which there is a little free time. It's a known thing in yeshivas. You get Friday afternoon off to prepare for the Jewish Shabbos, the Sabbath. There are, of course, the Shabbos itself, the Sabbath, where a person doesn't do any work. That doesn't mean they can't learn, but that means that they don't do work. There's vacation times, the Jewish holidays off. There is some days off, but right now, Mendel, fill us in about you told us about how you fill in these, so to speak, these free time.
Well, every day after school, after 10, there is time. And a lot of boys stay in the study hall till real late. I mean, it's not all learning. Boys are boys, and that's the way we are. But, even when they talk, just plain talk, it's warm talk, and it's togetherness, and there's no wildness. And, people are really good together. And then Friday afternoons, everyone goes out in pairs. You go out with a friend, and you go to different parts. We study in New York. We go to different parts of the city. I go to Manhattan. I go to 28th and 5th. I go to a building there. And we meet Jews, our friends. We go there every week. And we put on tefillin with them. We put a mezuzah on their door. And we speak to them about the Torah portion. And it's real nice because you get real friendly with these people. And, and you give them a chance to put on tefillin. Some people think, well, tefillin just, one-time mitzvah and just for 5 minutes, and what's it worth? But the truth is, a mitzvah is good forever. And a mitzvah is always good, and it gives a lot of good feeling, good warmth. In fact, there's a little story that we go every week to this fellow who puts on tefillin, and we have a good laugh together, and you just have a good time. And there's this fellow next door in the next office who we asked him, but he was too shy. He wasn't up to it. And one week he comes running in next door and he says, "Fellas, please let me put on tefillin." So he asked him, it's wonderful, but what's this week? Manashtana ha'ikazem mikol weeks. So he told us that he was, in Milan on a business trip up in Italy, and there he met a fellow who wanted to put on tefillin with him. So he felt, well, here in New York, I might as well. It's so nice feeling.
Can't get away from it.
Can't get away from the tefillin. It's a nice feeling, and it's good for the boy as well. It's good for the boys, and it gives us a lot of good feeling about our Yiddishkeit. When you teach it to someone else and you give it to someone else. On the holidays, we go out in different neighborhoods. On the Hanukkah holiday, we went and lit menorahs with my friend and I lived in Norris with 80 families in their homes, and we danced and sang with them Russian songs, and we played dreidel with them. We gave them Hanukkah Yelt. It was real nice.
It's interesting. This outreach aspect is what we're touching upon now. It's very interesting. Here, there's on one hand, one scale, there's such an intense learning schedule. And then we're on the other hand that we're being taught that it's not enough just to learn for yourself and become a scholar, but you have to worry about that other person. And not just another person who knows maybe someone who's a little less in your class than you. You're talking about someone out in the business and doesn't even know the basics of how to do any one mitzvah, real outreach program. And I think it's important, like you say, for yourself. I mean, of course it's important for everybody. It's important for that Jewish person to do the mitzvah and get him a little bit initiated into doing mitzvahs and to get him ready to do mitzvahs and to maybe he'll enjoy one mitzvah, he'll do another mitzvah. But of course, like you say, it's interesting for the students to know that you can't just learn for yourself and take care of yourself. A person has to really understand that there is an outside world for them, and there's an outside Jewish world. I mean, the majority of Jewish people, so to speak, nowadays, it's unfortunate that they really don't know about Jewish life. They talk about 50% intermarriage rates. I mean, this is a total alienation away from Jewish tradition and the Jewish education. We know about the bar mitzvah dropouts. We talked on the show many times before with many different people of how that people learn for a few years. If they know Hebrew, we can't even say they know Hebrew. They just know how to read the Hebrew, which without a translation or understanding of it, and then they're turned off after the bar mitzvah. They have the big party. So you're dealing with, unfortunately, to say millions of Jewish people out there. But the way to start is, like you say, with one step, one mitzvah, and that's how it goes. Do you have any adverse reaction sometimes to mitzvahs, or like you say, sometimes people are shy, or
people are shy, and sometimes it's rough, but no things come easy, no good things come easy. It's still tough, but
you mentioned the Russians. I mean, of course, there must be thousands upon thousands of Russians, especially in the last few years, that were there before, but even now that they've come into America. Right. Is there special programs for these Russians?
Well, there are a lot of programs for them, but yeshiva is mostly an intense study program. We do a little bit on our free time. In fact, there are even Russian boys in our school, who's incredible. They really caught up real quick. We have 2 Russian boys in our class from Moscow. They've been there a year ago.
They were learning in Moscow, or they just came to America?
In Moscow. And it's amazing because it's like the same yeshiva and the same studies, and they've come over here and they're like just part of the guys. It's like really nice.
Well, it's incredible that they should be able to learn in Russia. I know, of course, the Russian Jewry is again a topic on this show, and we've talked about it, and people know about it, that they're releasing Jews from Russia, and they're starting up programs. But just to see, it's just mind-boggling that there could be really in for the last 70 years under communist rule, and 70 years plus, and still that people go back and that they're learning again in the same old Talmud and the same Jewish studies, which links us really to the past and assures us for the future. But it really is when a person sees it. I've gone down to New York and I saw a few, I couldn't even speak English to them because they didn't know English. I mean, they were so raw coming from Russia. They were just greenhorns coming from Russia, and just to sit there and that they were actually learning with, it's really, like I say, I think it's mind-boggling that, and it shows that really there's Jews you're connected. We always say this also, maybe say they don't know English, the Jews and the Israelis don't know English, the Russians don't know English, or all 4 corners of the world. And other cultures, maybe we're eating bagels and the Israelis are eating their falafels or whatever. There's really hard to say any common denominator. We could say, well, we're all Jews, but beyond that, what can we say is a common cultural point? And we can only say is the Torah, that the Torah they're learning in Israel and Russia. You have other students around coming from different parts of the world.
There are a lot of students. In fact, at my table, you have like 4 peers to a table. They're Portuguese-speaking people. They learn the Talmud in Portuguese. We learn in English. And those learn Yiddish. Yeah. We have a lot of boys in our class. Boys come from as far as Melbourne, Moscow. Boys from Italy and England. It's real nice. Nice mix of guys. And they all it's one group of chaver.
And I guess it's interesting to say that all the Jewish people from all over could be unified in one common cause, and it really doesn't make a difference where they're from. Like a United Nations of Jews, so to speak, that they're all together.
In fact, what you were saying before about the intensity of learning, it's really hard to describe it. How do you learn a Gemara? And Gemara is not just you're not just reading the Talmud. At face value, it's quite simple. to a yeshiva student. And you don't even read the commentary. It's just sitting on your own and really grueling through it and thinking over in your own mind the case and the words and using them over and the questions, raising your own questions and discussing them between yourself and arguing out the case and looking into another commentary and seeing how he views the point. And it's really very, very, very involved. It's not just reading at all. It's really, really hard work. And after a day of Talmud, it's like,
Well, truthfully, intellectual work is, even though maybe you're not hitting a hammer or you're building a building, for example, but of course it really is more intense, and like I say, it takes more energy than really than doing anything else. But it's important for, I think, again, the viewers to understand that the yeshiva students are not, like I say, losers, or you say in Yiddish in Nebuchos, that they know how to relate to the world. One idea I'd like to maybe bring up to you is like what they say in Hebrew is tachlis, like purpose. I mean, maybe they're still young, of course, but still maybe like older students, what happens and how that they achieve out in the outside world once they're out of the yeshivas, the four walls of the yeshiva.
Well, yeshiva, they graduate and they marry and they live their own lives. And they have a real solid Jewish education upbringing, which is the most integral part of their existence and what matters to them most. But a lot of them, as careers, there are those who take professional careers and those who go into business. Most of them, the bulk of our yeshiva, will probably go into outreach or rabbinical studies in the future.
I think that's a tremendous asset. Well, I just wanted to hear it, so to speak, for firsthand for our viewers. But again, many of these boys, that they're far from being losers. They know how to think, which is really, if you go back into education and ask an educator, what's the main idea of education? It isn't, so to speak, the 2 + 2 = 4. It's just teaching a person how to think. And of course, I think Mendel here has already underscored that idea that learning the Talmud surely teaches you how to think. And once you have the skills how to think and to work out situations, then you can click into any specific situation in your life, whatever it comes up to be. But besides that, I think that they're growing over here, if we can say that, a tremendous asset, in a certain sense that they're needing more rabbis, more teachers, let us say that. I mean, maybe they're not rabbis of synagogues, and maybe there's not that many positions for them, we can say, but there's a tremendous amount of teachers that are needed. Like we said, the level of ignorance of the Jewish people is a very low point. It is growing. I can't say it's at the bottom, because it has actually bounced up, and more people are interested in Judaism, more people are being educated. There's hundreds of thousands of kids around the world in Jewish day schools, so that's a plus. But on the other hand, there's more to be needed. There's just more people. There's a limit of how much a rabbi can teach classes. I mean, of course, in students in schools, that there's needed teachers, of course. There's a limit of how many kids can be in a classroom, and there's more and more. And of course, like you say, it's not just in New York. You're talking about, I mean, just by yourself, taking Italy and Melbourne, the other side of the world already, that they're setting up Jewish schools wherever the Jews are, and really, where the Jewish people are is really entire over the world. I mean, just look at Russia itself. There's millions of Jews, and I don't know how many classrooms are. It's nice that they have yeshivas there, but whatever they have, I mean, times a million more Jews that are probably not receiving anything. You could just understand how much work is cut out for Jewish and Torah educators, and this is a plus. It has to start somewhere. You can't just hope and have seminars and as many people want to make the story, what's going to be with Jewish future today? It takes, like you say, the first step. It takes a person to be educated themselves, to know what they're talking about Judaism, and then go into the next step, now reaching out. So you need two things. You need a person to be educated, and then you have to be told at the same time, hey, listen, now that you're great, you're a scholar, but don't keep it for yourself. There's such an urgent need out there to teach other people.
Yeah, the Baal Shem Tov said, Shem was the founder of Chassidism, he wrote that if you know an Aleph, go out and teach the Aleph, even before you know the base. Back to what you were saying about the goals of education. The Rebbe always stresses that yeshiva education is not just to educate the mind, educate the intellect, but yeshiva education is to educate the entire Jew, his heart and his limbs and his entire life. That's what yeshiva system is. It's not just learning and leaving our outside lives on the side, but yeshiva education is giving our entire selves to a yeshiva, involving ourselves, and making it our entire life.
I think that's what the yeshiva is actually doing over here. That, I mean, again, I don't want to put it down. I wouldn't should say that, but the college student, going back to contrasting, because I think this is important to seeing like what kind of products are the yeshiva students raising, what kind of people they're coming out of, and that's really in a way the bottom line is they come out of the yeshiva, or they come out of the college. What kind of people are you producing? And in college, are they socially oriented? Are they caring about other people's? And again, the word yuppie has been thrown out a lot in the last 10 to 12 years, in the 1980s, 1970s even. That person who cares about themselves just needs so much and more, and they got to go here, and they got to go skiing, and another vacation, a new car, and a new this, and new that, and the other thing. And how much social orientation, how many hours during the week are they caring about someone else? How much money of theirs that they're making these good wages because they're college educated and they're professionals? How much money are they giving to charitable causes, as much as compared to how much they need for the extra car that they have money, for the extra charity that they can't find it. So this is in contrast. What I'm saying is being a Torah student, on the other hand, is just not only think, oh, well, when you grow up or when you're out of here, care about something. It doesn't work that way also. I don't know if it would work that way. You can't just preach to somebody, oh, later on you will do. You have to start them right early. You have to teach them. No, this is an integral part of your week. That not only you studying, you're caring about somebody else. You can't just later on expect, well, I'm sure once you're on your own and you're making your salary, or you're going to care about somebody else, because these things aren't normal. They're not natural feelings. They have to be educated. Just like you can't expect someone to come out and go, oh, well, you're smart, do calculus. Well, you never taught the guy calculus. How is he going to learn calculus now? It's impossible. It's ridiculous. So in a way, I think that a person cannot just say, all right, we expect you to be socially oriented and care about your neighbors and care about your community, unless you start teaching that person right when they're young, to teach them, hey, you have to care about other people. And I think this is a very big contrast. I really believe this, because, all right, it's one thing rabbis, you can say, well, all right, you're going to be a rabbi, you're going to be a Jewish educator, and that should be part of your training, to educate other people, not to relate and talk to other people. But you're saying it really aren't all the boys aren't that way. They will go into business, and they will go into different professions, and they'll very be apt for that. On the other hand, even these people will not just be busy making money, that they will be also caring about. They'll be told at the same time, well, all right, you're going into business, but you do have to give charity. You have to give some of your money to other people and help other people. You have to give some of your time to help somebody else out. So this is, I think, like a good point that you were making. This is educating the whole person, not only their mind, but their emotional character and the full human being, to care about not only themselves, but also family. And let's take away from that today it's not so simple that a person should say, hey, yes, when I'm going to grow up, I'm going to have a wife, I'm going to have kids, I'm going to take care of them. I'm not going to be caring about everybody else in the street, so therefore I'm going to have a whole family, I'm going to have a whole unit and care about my family. And again, it may sound simple, but it isn't so simple. What's the proof? The proof is, look out there. People don't understand it. They were never taught that, yes, that when you have a wife, you have a family, you have to care for them, you have to deal and give time of your week for them. But again, maybe it's not so drummed in and taught so much, but by living experience, I think this is important. So teaching, again, that whole person of how to be a person for themselves, gain for themselves intellectually, care about their family, care about their community, and really no matter what profession they choose. But of course, like I said, there is a tremendous need for Jewish educators today, because there just aren't enough, and there are teachers out there that are teaching Jewish subjects which are really not so qualified. So if you don't have a qualified teacher, you can imagine what kind of student's going to come out of there.
Sure.
Well, I just think that this is an important lesson for us, and I hope the viewers gain from this idea also, because, like I said, I think that maybe we should say that it's been a bad image, bad public relations to yeshiva people. Like I said before at the beginning of the show, I think people say the fiddler on the roof, And again, these are novels. It's I always bring out. It's not like I'm writing my point of view and they had their point of view. Their point of view was a novel. It was fiction. It didn't. It was just for entertainment anyway. They weren't just giving a depiction of what life was. Just like you go to the movies today, no one's going to say that's a normal American. What you go see a person. With all the situations that happens to any soap opera or whatever have you, no one's going to say, "Oh, you see that's a regular American. The American life is a soap opera." And again, that's ridiculous. Everybody knows that. As much as to take a look at a novel and just think, "Oh, you see that's it. That's the typical yeshiva student because I saw a movie based on a novel." Well, you can also imagine how ridiculous it is.
It's true. I know a lot of people that think that yeshiva's life is very backward and very ghetto-like, and and the students don't like it, and it's tough, and it's just because their parents sent them there. It's not true at all. I mean, every boy loves it. Not every boy, but almost everybody loves it, and the boys are very into it. And because it's not really forced upon us, but it's something we enjoy and we live for, so it has more meaning to us. I mean, the guys on the way to lunchroom, back from the lunchroom, and on the way to the shul and back from the dorm, the guys are all, even in the plain talk, are all discussing the Gemara and the Talmud, and they're discussing the Chassidus that we have studied, and Jewish issues. And these are our concerns, our primary concerns. And boys enjoy it. My study partner and I, we live through the Talmud. It's not just something we have to take a class and get over with it. It's something we really enjoy and we really feel for, and something that's really part of us. Especially the Chassidic philosophy, which discusses the Jew and what is a Jew all about, and how he's to serve God, and with what he's to serve God, and what is the purpose and meaning behind all these seemingly trivial mitzvahs that we have. What is the meaning and the feeling behind it? Chassidus gives us a lot of the warmth.
I think that's really a tremendous point that you have just touched upon, Mendel, because it's not only just to do this and sit here and like sometimes when people go to synagogue, sit down, stand up Judaism, and they have no feeling for a reason. But see, the reasoning is there. And well, maybe this is what you need a philosophy for. This is what the Hasidic philosophy does imbue inside the students is, yes, you are doing actions. Maybe they're different than the world, but there's a reason for it. And a person has a reason for something, and they see an inner feeling, they're going to want to do it. But you can't just really, maybe there were people out there, and they do say, "Oh, I was just told, do this and be quiet and don't ask any questions." And really, maybe they were right. That isn't a proper way for education. But, we only have a few minutes. I'd like to end off with an invitation for anybody. Maybe they're feeling a little remorse that they say, well, maybe there was a good yeshiva education. But listen, Mendel's young, and I'm a little older, and it's lost. What can I do? I can never have this opportunity. Maybe I'd like to really had a better feeling about Judaism, as I think Mendel has portrayed here, that there is really a warm feeling, and no one had to go through Judaism and begrudgingly. So there are different programs to help a person, like it says, even from the Aleph base, to start off, no matter what their age. If they're 18, they're a college student. If they're younger, bring them into a day school. Or if they're older, there's never too late. That a person can start slowly but surely, and that they can have a little bit of a feeling like this also, of trying to understand the Talmud. And just, I think, really for people out there to have a good feeling about their Judaism, which I think you've given over. I think you did portray to the people out there. I think that's an important point that you have given us. So I just want to thank you, Mendel, for bringing out a little bit of an insight into the real life, should we call it, the real life of a yeshiva student, and bringing, of course, portraying the warmth of what a yeshiva student really feels for his Judaism. Thank you very much for being on The Jewish View.
Thanks much. It's great to be here.
Shalom. Welcome to The Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Delmar Chabad Center. And once again, we take up the question of evolution. Is it a possibility? Is it a valid theory or not? Now, of course, many of people just say immediately, well, we know it's the old topic. You're right, I'm right. People teach you about evolution in school. We've been bombarded 10 million years ago, 20 million years ago, billion years ago. Took my kids recently to a granite area, and of course, when was this rock formation? Constantly bombarded 10 million years ago, 20 million years ago, constantly being bombarded by this evolutionary theory that things are millions of years old, billions of years old, and Is there any validity behind these ideas? Is it true that the world has been created or whatever, formed or produced or redirected, whatever you're going to say, millions and billions of years old? Or, of course, as the Bible says, 57, 51. Now, what I'm trying to say to you is I'm trying to direct you into a thinking way. Not to say, well, I mean, I was taught in school and all the signposts, and I go to the museum, and I go here, and I go there, and everybody say it's 10 million years old, or whatever big number you want to put on it, and everybody says so it must be so. Maybe it's not that way. And the way we can say is not saying, I'm going to say, believe what I have to say, and this kind of idea of believe, because you can believe one way, believe the other. Who says they're valid? So I'm trying to say to you, let's try to understand this, trying to use rationale. If we put our thinking caps on and analyze with cold intellect, then let's see what we get up to. Are we dealing with theories and it just seems reasonable? Or is it in fact impossible? That's what we're going to deal with today. And I just want to bring out to you that just to remove this misconception that most people have is what I just said. Well, everybody says it's so it must be so. Remember, and we're talking about Columbus discovering America it's almost 500 years ago, so it's on people's minds. Before Columbus discovered America, everybody thought that the world was flat. All right? So you got millions and millions of people in Europe, in the civilized world, and everybody thought that the world was flat. And, of course, we know it's untrue. So, therefore, I'm trying to tell to you also, maybe this is another misconception that the world is under. Millions and million years old, and maybe, in fact, it isn't. Well, let's see. Now, this is an article called Evolution, a Genetic Impossibility. It's an article taken from the book Human Intelligence Gone Ape, published by the National Conference of Synagogue Youth, by Josh Greenberger. To most people, science is seen as modern, up-to-date, and perhaps even the promise of a futuristic wonders. A generation that possesses supersonic jets, intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, space shuttles, and sophisticated computers, and hardly be called primitive, or can it? In the midst of all of this state-of-the-art technology, there seems to be a rather primitive theory which, although steadily losing credibility, even among those who have adhered for a long time, still is many convinced that it is based on science. This theory has proven one thing beyond a shadow of a doubt. Although modern technology is nearing Star Wars sophistication, modern man is still capable of some embarrassingly primitive thinking. I'm talking about the scientific theory of evolution. If this theory is not honest misinterpretation, it may very well be the most sophisticated hoax ever perpetuated on the human race. The scientific concept of the origin of life on Earth begins with the premise that life first appeared billions of years ago with the formation of microscopic organisms out of inanimate matter. In the billions of years that followed, small organisms evolved into higher and more complex forms of life, and one species evolved into another. The question here is not whether this actually happened. To any human being living in the 1990s, the question should be, is such a scenario even possible? Well, according to what we know today about genetics, the answer is an unequivocal no. Probably the strongest thing going for evolution at the time of its inception, more than 100 years ago, was that virtually nothing was known about genetics in that era. I am convinced that if the public had had a decent understanding of genetics and random mutation in particular before being presented with the theory of evolution, the theory could never have been taken seriously and certainly could never have been accepted as legitimate science. According to evolutionists, random mutation is purportedly what brought life from one cell stage to its present complexity. That is, through a series of beneficial accidents of random mutations, they claim, simple organisms evolved over billions of years into new and more complex species. Keep in mind that for one species to have evolved into another, massive random genetic changes would have to have occurred throughout the Earth's history. But genetics, the most crucial aspect of evolution, does not only not support the theory, but actually contradicts it. Modern man has been acquainted with and acutely affected by random mutations more than any prehistoric creature. Sources of random mutations have been around us for years. What are they? Carcinogenic chemicals, cosmic rays, sources of radioactivity such as nuclear weapons, nuclear reactors, nuclear waste, and medical X-rays. And some of these sources of random mutations have been affecting modern man way before he even knew how they wreak their havoc. For example, exposure of high doses of radiation to limited parts of the body can cause severe tissue damage and eventual necrosis. Exposure of the entire body to a few hundred rem, a unit used for measuring radiation effectiveness, can initially cause nausea. Then in about a month, the person might begin suffering hemorrhages, anemia, tiredness, weakness, and an increased risk of infection. Although some may survive, others will die as a result of these maladies. At about 1,000 rem, nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea may develop within hours of exposure. As these symptoms become worse, they are followed by fever, loss of fluid, severe infections, and finally death. At about 10,000 rem, the dose to which a worker might be exposed during a nuclear reactor accident, vomiting and diarrhea would occur within an hour, followed by reduced blood pressure, convulsions, and unconsciousness. Death would come within 1 to 3 days. Radiation can also have long-term genetic effects. Studies show that radiation can cause not just one, but a variety of different types of maladies. Mutations. One of the effects of these aberrations is cancer. The cancer can show up years or even decades after the organism's exposure to radiation. If the organism does not show any signs of cancer, there is still the possibility that cancer may show up in future generations. Some other disorders or genetic diseases that may show up in later generations as a result of random mutations are hemophilia, Down syndrome, congenital cataract, spontaneous abortions, cystic fibrosis, color blindness, and muscular dystrophy. Still, other diseases such as diabetes, heart disorders, asthma, and schizophrenia could manifest themselves in later generations as a result of random mutations combined with environmental factors. This was just a quick glimpse of the severe effects of random changes on biological life. And it seems that the results are almost always the same: deterioration, destructions, and in many cases, death. Does this coincide with what evolutionists have been chewing our ears off for years? For years, we've been hearing stories about how biological life underwent billions of years of random genetic changes. We've been hearing how, by accident, some of these changes resulted in beneficial mutations. We've been hearing how these beneficial mutations eventually resulted in new and more complex species. Yet when we look at what random genetic changes, or any other random changes for that matter, actually do to biological life, we find nothing but disease and death. Where are all those beneficial mutations evolutionists have been talking about? Now, one patient has ever developed or passed on to future generations better biceps, for example, as a result of radiotherapy. Now, one of the thousands of surviving bomb victims of Hiroshima and Nagasaki has developed a more evolved brain, for example, as a result of exposure to radioactivity. Now, one person involved in a nuclear reactor accident has developed a more sophisticated skin, for instance, which is tougher and more durable than average. In virtually every case, random mutations have resulted in havoc and destruction. Is it possible that modern technology has actually disapproved evolution rather than helped it? Evolutionists in the past have hidden behind that "it took billions of years" routine. Before the nuclear age, it may have been necessary to get into a time machine to verify whether, given enough time, random mutations would cause life to evolve. However, with the advent of modern technology's ability to affect massive random mutations relatively quickly, there is no longer a need to dig into the past to see the contrived fallacies supporting the evolutionary powers of random mutation. The answer is right in front of us. Random mutations result in quite the opposite of what we've been led to believe. They result in nothing but illness and fatalities, not improvements. What's more, the more massive and prolonged the occurrences of these mutations, the greater the havoc and destruction. So what do you suppose would happen to a planet subjected to random mutations for billions of years? Total annihilation. When we take what we know about random mutations today as fact and try to reconstruct a scenario of these alleged billions of years of Earth's history, instead of the fairy tale story of evolution, we come up with a picture that more and more resembles a horrible scene out of a post-nuke movie. Even if Earth had already been as populated in that alleged period of 3.5 billion years ago as it has been today, and has since been affected by billions and billions of random mutations, according to what we know today about random mutations, by now life would probably have been virtually wiped out. With random mutation being the highly destructive force that it apparently is, the process that was supposed to have caused life to evolve is precisely what have caused, in all probability, such genetic havoc that few organisms would have survived the ordeal. Furthermore, under such circumstances, survival of the fittest is a totally ludicrous concept. The word fit would have described largely those organisms which were less disease-ridden than the rest, a far cry from the better species of evolution. And of those fit survivors, many would have passed on genetic diseases to their offsprings. Even if the fit had not been wiped out by the random mutations, their offspring still would have stood a chance of being wiped out by hereditary genetic diseases. Then any disease-free offspring would again be threatened with annihilations when this entire mutation cycle started over again. Thus, after billions and billions of years of random mutations, even in the unlikely event that some genes mutated in a way that might have ultimately produced some beneficial changes to an organism, an already populated planet would have been reduced to a few diseased life forms at best. Those few beneficial genes, if they could even have existed, would have been so overwhelmed by the staggering high number of diseased genes necessary to produce just a few beneficial accidents that they could never have borne any fruit, and organisms would have been wiped out long before it had an iota of a chance to change or improve. In a sense, Earth would have resembled a planet after a nuclear holocaust. Now, if a planet began with relatively new life forms, as Earth allegedly did, how far would life have gotten? I don't mean how far would evolution have gotten. I mean, how far would those few organisms have gotten before being wiped out by the destructive powers of random mutation? According to what we've actually seen random mutations do in modern times, life never would have gotten off the ground, let alone proliferated into a highly complex and healthy species. In all likelihood, Earth would have turned into a desolate planet long ago. The insanity of evolution is also apparent in the more aesthetic aspects of man. How could qualities such as artistry, abstract thinking, and appreciation of music have become traits common to an entire species? According to the mechanics or imagery of evolution, it would have been a great wonder if such qualities, so meaningless to the survival of purely physical and biological systems, would have evolved in only a minute fraction of a species. Yet to be present to one degree or another in virtually every human being? How? This should never have happened. The existence of such aesthetic human qualities as emotion, humor, and intellect cannot be explained biologically, no matter how ridiculous you get. Why, for example, did nature give us a sense of humor? How did nature even know what a sense of humor was? And how did a sense of humor render humans more fit to survive? There are millions of plants and animals without a sense of humor that obviously survived. There are even humans without a sense of humor who seem to survive. How did such a quality ever evolve? With a little serious thought, it should have at least somewhat obvious that the scenario proposed by the theory of evolution does not work and certainly never could have occurred. One may even find it puzzling how a concoction such as evolution could have ever been accepted as science in the first place. I think that if evolution can be called science, there should be several other equally qualified scientific topics included in scientific textbooks. The physics behind Superman's X-ray vision, the story of how the power of speech evolved in Mickey Mouse, and the chemical composition of Batman shock repellent spray. If we're going to have fun theories, let's really make them fun. Well, this is, I think, very important for us to think about. And I'm just not telling you to, again, to believe what I have to say, but sit back and think about it and analyze it. And just because it was taught you in school or it's on a nice sign in a museum, be a little bit critical and use a little intellectual curiosity to figure out and try to understand what is really the facts behind the theories. Well, to go on a totally different subject, I know that was a little heavy duty, so therefore let's see, when you get too tired of working, you go on a vacation. So I guess I put your minds to work thinking about evolution. So let's go on a little vacation ourselves, and like what we like doing around here is looking at Jewish communities in different parts of the world. Well, we always like taking a first-hand look. If I can get someone from Australia, from Israel, from Europe or whatever, and get a first-hand look about it. But sometimes I just can't. They just don't come flying my way. So we'll just have to take this article and look at the Jews of Ireland. My homeland, Ireland, is famed on many accounts. Blustery weather conditions, the creaminess of its butter, the strength of its beer, the melancholy of its poets, the tragedy of its war. Yet nowhere among even the most extensive list of its particularities is cited what may be perhaps its most unique claim to fame. Its Jewish population, Irish Jews. The very sound of it strikes a note of discord. And yet rather than posing an ethnic dichotomy, the blending of these two cultural forces has fared rather well. For centuries, the remainder of the population has been diagonally pitched, Protestant against Catholic, along the lines of socio-political religious war in the North. While far too many have reached adulthood cloaked in bitterness and contempt, and too many kids have floundered through childhoods full with bombs and blood and death, the Jews of Ireland, who've attracted to their community some of the most eminent figures in international Jewry, including Isaac Herzog, father of Israeli president, and Lord Emanuel Jacobowitz, former chief rabbi of Great Britain, have managed to carve out an existence of relative peace. This is their story. There is no shortage of theories as to when the first Jews actually arrived in Ireland. The most fanciful of these is Jeremiah founding Tara, historical Irish site. The name Tara judged to be a corruption of the Jewish Torah. Yet another allegation implies a direct link between the lost tribes of Dan and the eventual inhabitants of Ireland. Unconsolidated inference aside, the first known group of Jews to form and maintain some kind of real community arrived in 1660. These were members of the Marrano clan of Spanish and Portuguese origin, fleeing from an anti-Judaic inquisition in their native land. They worshipped the Crane land in Dublin City, the first ever synagogue established on Irish soil, under the guidance of one Rabbi Aaron ben Moses from Poland, who brought with him scrolls, tefillin, and mezuzahs to furnish the cramped room that was to become their place of prayer. His duties were manifold, for in addition to rabbi, he also served as shochet, ritual slaughterer, secretary, and marriage broker to the few families who comprised his community. In 1716, the first Jewish cemetery was acquired at Ballybough, on the outskirts of the capital. There, a barren wasteland, the former burial site for suicides, became the last resting place for Jews residing in Ireland. A newspaper article at the time observed, "Here at Ballybough, the Israelite people have finally found a home, a place of rest." During this period, the Jewish community was so poor that in 1746 it faced public embarrassment when city officials prosecuted because 7 shillings rent was owed on the cemetery plot. In this era of economic despair, some Jews converted to Protestantism to gain acceptance under British rule. Jews, like Catholics, were banned from labor unions and denied all social and economic privileges afforded to Protestants. Still others resorted to peddling. However, most sought to better their lot and worked hard to become merchants and traders, dealers, musicians, artists, and pencil makers, etc. There were even a few ostrich feather dyers. While the community swelled and shriveled proportionally over the next 100 years with the arrival and departure of Jews from England, Prague, Bohemia, France, and Armenia, it underwent no drastic changes until 1881, when the May laws were promulgated in Russia. Sought and murdered by the Tsar's marauding soldiers, Jewish men, women, and children, carrying little more than a few cherished belongings and the clothes on their backs, fled for their lives in droves. They boarded ships bound for America. When the vessels docked on Irish shores to pick up extra passengers, many Lithuanians disembarked, believing that they reached their destination, and nobody saw fit to inform them otherwise. Thus arrived hundreds of Lithuanian Jews in Ireland during the late 1800s. Simple people themselves, Russian Jews quickly adapted to the ways of Irish country folk. They took to the streets on the outskirts of Dublin hawking goods, anything from silks and scarves to blankets, spices, and teas, what they carried in bundles on their backs. Rapidly acquiring their clientele among the nation's poor, they were able to provide for their families. The more enterprising of them fast becoming merchants and wholesalers. The more adventurous moving south to Cork and Limerick counties, or north to Belfast. The sudden influx of Russian Jewry did pose major problems within Dublin City, where the synagogue accommodated only 90 souls, while the community expanded to 500. Desperate for funds to build a new temple, Irish Jews advertised in both English and local papers requesting donations. The result was nothing short of outstanding, and in 1892 the first ever synagogue built expressly for Jewish worship was declared open. On a bleak, snowbound morning, a throng of people of varying creed gathered outside the newly constructed edifice on Adelaide Road, while the chief rabbi of Ireland declared, "You have come here, my foreign brethren, from a country like unto Egypt, of old, to a land which offers you hospitable shelter. It is said that Ireland is the only country in the world which cannot be charged with persecuting the Jews." Sadly, not all the Irish displayed such tolerance, and having just escaped a pogrom in Russia, the 150 Jews residing in County Limerick in 1904 had to face yet another. A certain Father Crea launched a full-fledged attack on the Limerick community. As a result, Jews were stoned, beaten, and robbed, forced to stay indoors with the drapes perpetually drawn. Limerick's rabbi at the time, Elias Levin, was attacked on the street in full view of his congregants. And as a boycott of Jewish traders took hold, most were forced to flee. Today only 2 Jews remain in Limerick, and last year in an unprecedented ceremony, Catholic and Protestant priests gathered to rededicate the Jewish cemetery of Limerick in a spirit of tolerance and peace to the Jews of the city. New turf was planted, the weeds, bottles, and debris removed, and injustice of old neutralized. In Dublin, however, during the 1900s, a little Jerusalem was being created. A Jewish school was founded. Although it was so tiny that pupils had to be taught in relays, the average school day culminating long after dark. Eventually, under auspices of Chief Rabbi Israel Isaac Herzog, father of Israeli president, the first partly state-sponsored Jewish school was established. As time went on, bakeries and butcher shops, groceries and haberdasheries opened around the inner city. The size and prosperity of the community advanced steadily. As the profile of the typical Irish Jew transformed from a poor, uneducated peasant to that of a knowledgeable, sophisticated, college-educated professional, the community, along with the facilities that serviced it, moved out to the more fashionable suburbs. By 1950, the Jewish communities of Dublin, Belfast, Cork, and Limerick combined had reached a maximum of 3,907 people, most of whom were comfortably entrenched in the upper echelon of society. Sadly, from there it's been a downhill slide, with entire families emigrating to Israel, America, and Britain over the last 40 years. There have been so many cross-cousin marriages that it's left almost everybody vaguely related to everyone else, severely narrowing the gene pool, forcing many to emigrate in the hopes of finding suitable marriage partners elsewhere. The result is increasingly fewer people being born into the community, the current 1,200 membership reflecting a shocking decline. And yet, for all its diminished capacity and ever-dwindling numbers, the Irish Jewish community has to be one of the most conscientious and respected in the world, boasting more committees, institutions, community-oriented programs than I could possibly list here. With a burial society, cheder, bar mitzvah classes, a mikvah committee, Talmud Torah, Jaffa, an adoption agency, Hadassah, B'nai B'rith Zona, board of Shechita, Machzi Ol Hadas, and Home for the Aged, to mention just a few. Every possible aspect of Jewish life is catered to. Dublin's community also offers its members first-rate education at Stratford College, an ultra-modern elementary and secondary school featuring a full curriculum in Jewish studies, an award-winning economics department, and the most advanced computer system in the country. There's also an excellent Jewish golf club in the Dublin Maccabee Sports Center, offering some of the finest playing services in the land, in addition to a kosher restaurant and a host of recreational activities. The modern-day visitor to Ireland's community will find much of interest, especially the Jewish Museum opened in 1985 by President Herzog. In addition to paintings and artifacts by famous Irish Jewish artists like Carrie Kurnoff, Jacob Sametian, and Ed Del Solomon, the museum offers a detailed history of the Jews in Ireland and the part they have played in the social, political, cultural, and spiritual development of the country. While they may face an uncertain future, there can be no doubt in anyone's mind that the Jews of Ireland have had a profound effect on the past. There have been 4 Jewish Lord Mayors in Dublin, Belfast, and Cork. Robert Briscoe, famed Irish patriot who participated in the Irish War for Independence from the British, was elected Dublin's first ever Jewish Lord Mayor in 1946. Many years later, his son Ben followed his lead by regaining the seat, and perhaps the most convincing evidence that Jews have indeed played a role by defining today's Ireland. There are 3 Jewish TDs, congressmen, in Ireland's parliament, in what must be the most evenly balanced representation of all time. Even each of those 3, Reverend Taylor, Ben Briscoe, and Alan Shatter, belongs to a different government party. Perhaps the essence of Ireland's Jewish community can best be expressed in the words of Rabbi Jacobowitz, who spent 10 years as chief rabbi there. With all the pettiness and peculiarities inevitably to be found here and there in a relatively small and for long isolated community, people showed themselves warm-hearted, kindly, and cooperative. And with all the undercurrent of drift from religious observance, this still remains a strong traditional community, possibly more so than any other set into a similar cultural pattern. To work with and for it was a pleasure, as well as a rare privilege. Well, I hope you like your tour to Ireland for a few minutes to went on a vacation to find that, yes, there were Jews and very great people in Ireland, and even it lives on today, even though albeit very small. Nevertheless, hopefully that they can grow, but they did have a rich history, and it's worth to go there. Well, thank you very much. Shalom. Welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Dalmar Chabad Center, and today we have a variety of subjects to talk about. Number 1, we will talk about genealogy. Many people, or most actually I should say, of the Jewish people in the United States today, about 90% of them have their roots in Eastern Europe. Now, the major countries, before World War II, of course, we're talking about, because now after the Holocaust things have obviously changed, but before the Holocaust, your major countries were Poland and Russia. I'm talking about concerning Jewish population. Actually, before World War I, which means before the Communist Revolution, Russia was #1 country with a Jewish population. After Russia's Communist Revolution, of course, in 1917, made it very difficult for the Jews, and even beforehand, many Jewish people were emigrating because of pogroms by the Tsars in the early 1900s. You really had then Poland took over after World War I as the #1 population with 3.5 million Jewish people, as it stated. After World War II, of course, we're all familiar, the Holocaust made tremendous shambles of Eastern Europe. Poland now today, people talk about 5,000 to 10,000 people, and they're all old people. There really isn't too much of a Jewish community. Many people, because of the traveling, want to go back and see what's happening to the Holocaust, what happened to in the Holocaust, what happened to these Jewish communities. There are cemeteries, there are historical sites to see, and this is actually what we're going to talk about today. Let's go back into Poland. And also your only genealogy, many people's, of course, the roots, or one grandparent came from Poland. American Jews take a walk in the footsteps of their ancestors. How many times have you been told the place where our family came from was wiped off the map during the Holocaust? All the records were destroyed and there is nothing left. Simply not true. In August 1990, Janet and Marvin Greenberg joined a group of American Jews for a unique tour to Poland where they visited Jewish sites in Warsaw, Lublin, and Krakow, met with members of the local Jewish community, and discovered a part of their past unknown for the longest time. For the first time, a group of American Jews researching their family history were allowed access to the Polish state archives, where they were permitted to go through registers of Jewish records from throughout Poland and to obtain copies for a fee. There were several features which made this tour unique and special. During our LOT flight, we received permission from the pilot for our tour group to deplane last so that photographs could be taken as we began our journey in the country of our ancestors. Much time and effort was expended prior to the trip to ensure its success. For instance, the Consul General of Poland in New York requested press coverage. The result was an interview, and if I can pronounce this correctly over here, Rzeczpospolita, a daily newspaper published throughout Poland of 300,000 circulation. The last night of the tour, the television crew from Polish Interpress Agency came to our hotel and suggested filming the next tour for Polish television. In New York, Orbis, the Polish travel office, went out of their way to accommodate the special needs of this tour by providing individual letters of introduction for the tour members to present to archivists in their ancestral towns. Additionally, Orbis provided postcards of Jewish interest for each tour participant and other special materials as well. 6 months prior to the tour, Orbis arranged for me to visit Poland so that I could plan the itinerary and meet with archival personnel. I was assured by Professor Dr. Marian Wojciechowski, director of the Polish State Archives, that archival personnel would cooperate by setting up an exhibition at each archival site, providing an orientation to the holdings and processing search requests to be submitted 8 weeks prior to arrival of the tour. Since it was the first such attempt at this type of tour, I had some apprehension whether all this would actually take place, but not only was everything arranged just as Professor Wojciechowski promised, the archival personnel even had the Jewish registers by town waiting for each tour participant in Lublin and Krakow. The Polish State Archives not only allowed access to their documents, but they also permitted photographs of the exhibition and of the documents, and at some locations, videotaping was allowed. The document exhibition at each research site, Warsaw, Lublin, and Krakow, consisted of various books containing registration of Jewish births, marriages, and deaths, which were representative of their holdings. A short history of each archive was presented prior to the on-site research for the individual tour participants. The Polish State Archives and Orbis are to be commended for their outstanding cooperation, prior planning, and accessibility. Indeed, we were at times overwhelmed at the effusive reception and spirit of cooperation we encountered throughout Poland, but officially at the archives and spontaneously as we approached people in the small towns for information. At the archival branch in Krakow, tour member Sheila Moscow found numerous documents for her family. And it was there that we made a remarkable discovery of a significant collection of Holocaust material, including over 1,000 pages of detailed biographical questionnaires completed by the Jews in the Krakow ghetto. We also saw and photographed several original posters, Nazi propaganda material, and an original photo album of pictures taken by the Nazis of the Krakow Jews as they were being deported. In one of those free coincidences, I happened to see the ghetto documents of Ben Gazals, a friend from New Hyde Park, listing his entire family. I brought back copies of the documents, and Ben was astonished that I had seen this material. Unfortunately, although there are over 1,000 pages of completed form representing a gold mine in genealogical data, none of it is indexed. After orientation at the archival branch in Lublin, we went to a large research room with several microfilm readers and were greeted with numerous stacks of Jewish register books prepared for each of our ancestral towns based upon the lists submitted prior to arrival. It was here that Joan Sanders of New Rochelle, New York, found several stacks of books for her ancestral towns and also the towns of her husband, Jerry. The Sanders ultimately located over 100 documents for their family members. According to Mr. Koos, the director of the Lublin State Archives, documents were not destroyed during World War II if they were in the archives. Present holding dates from 1810. Jewish records are listed by town, region, and from 1875 there is an alpha index for each book by letter of last name. Additionally, Marvin and Janet Greenberg had stacks of Jewish record books for their towns of Krasnow and Rizhovic waiting as well. Unfortunately, the Greenbergs had to make a tough choice as that day they'd chosen to visit their ancestral towns. However, several of the tour participants looked up records for them. The Sanders seemed to hit pay dirt wherever they looked. For instance, after the tour, they visited their ancestral towns of Gribo, Malava, Minsk-Mazovsky, Zelikow, and Tiraspol, where they found more documents and photographed tombstones. In Zelikow, they met with the town historian, who brought out a German workbook which included daily attendance records, and they discovered several were for family members. One was for Joan's cousin, now living in Australia, who worked at the local firehouse, which is still standing and was so photographed by Jerry. Also, the Sanders were able to purchase old photos depicting the town as it were before the Holocaust, when it's 70% Jewish. Now, not a single Jew remains. The tour participants were a diverse group. Some traveled alone or with friends, while many were married couples. A father brought his 2 adult children, and a mother came with her married daughter. Some tour members were experienced researchers, while others were novices. But all of them were amazed at how many records survived the Holocaust that to this day remain largely unknown to the outside. The tour participants, ranging in age from early 20s to mid-60s and representing 12 states, were asked if they would like to visit their ancestral towns. Many chose to do so and were provided with an English-speaking guide and driver, along with instructions as to what to do in the town. Guidelines were provided in the form of questions in English, with the Polish translation immediately following, covering such subjects as location of vital record office, location of Jewish cemetery, and synagogue or their former sites. Contact with local historian who might be helpful, location of local museum, and newspaper office, old photos, articles, or maps. Prior to departure, each member of the tour received an 82-page packet of material, plus various brochures, maps, and individual research on their ancestral town. One of the most poignant and emotional experiences of the tour was an unscheduled stop along the bus route between Warsaw and Lublin. Tour member Ed Rubinstein of Baltimore was born in Kenskawala, left there in 1937 at age 16 with his parents, and had not been back in 53 years. Although Rubinstein had made arrangements to visit Kenskawala the next day with a private guide and tour, when it was discovered that the tour bus would pass within a few kilometers of this town. I directed the bus driver to make a detour, which did not become evident to Rubinstein until we were practically there. We stopped at the edge of town by the sign Kenskawala, and I'd get off the bus to have his picture taken by the sign. As the many cameras recorded the moment, the tears rolled down his face. And at that second, many of us cried as we shared these thoughts of days long ago. The bus was parked in Kenskawala, and we all headed to the corner stand, which sells miscellaneous items, including postcards, a common sight throughout Poland. By this time, Rubinstein was pointing out familiar sights, yet describing at the same time which was no longer there. By the time we left town, he had located his former home and reestablished a connection to his past with the very first person he spoke with, the blacksmith. It seemed when he was a young boy, Rubinstein had a part-time job working for the local blacksmith. The father of the man we met that day. We all joined them while they talked and then made plans to return the next day, when Rubinstein could meet the blacksmith's wife and join them for tea. When we reached Lublin, it was time for Shabbos dinner. Rubinstein rose to make a toast and a little speech. I was warmed by the reception I received from the Polish people. However, in all my traveling to different countries, I have never traveled with nicer people in my life, especially when they shared the emotional moments with me in Kenskawala. They were happy for me and cried with me. It broke my heart. I never knew there were such wonderful people in this world. I will never forget this group as long as I live. I consider you my family. Many special things happened in Lublin. For instance, after dinner, Rubinstein met Marek Obara at the bar, who in the course of a very brief conversation offered to take Ed and Bess Rubinstein back to Kenskawala the next day for their visit rather than the prearranged driver and guide. Rubinstein thought about this and decided to accept Marek's invitation, who was well known at the hotel and described as a prominent businessman in Lublin. The next day, Marek arrived at the appointed time, took the Rubinsteins back to Kenskawala, drove them around, provided translations, and later invited them to visit his home in the country the following day, where they were greeted by his wife and served refreshments. Upon their return to the hotel, Mrs. Rubinstein was given a gift and a large sack of apples from a Obara orchard to be distributed to the tour members. In each city, meetings were arranged with members of the local Jewish community, and in all 3 cities, A leader of the community was invited to speak to our group following dinner, where he described the history of the local Jewish community, its status today, and archive activities. Additional evening programs included the founder of the Dallas Holocaust Resource Center, Mike Jacobs, a friend of mine who coincidentally was visiting in Warsaw when our tour arrived, who described his experience in Auschwitz-Birkenau and Treblinka, which was important as none of the people on the tour had ever visited a death camp previously. Another evening program was provided by Jan Jigalski, an acclaimed authority on the status of Jewish cemeteries in Poland, based upon 30 years of research. He brought photographs and documentation of Jewish cemeteries with him to our program, was literally besieged by the tour participants to draw up diagrams of the location of the cemetery in their ancestral towns. Mr. Jigalski stayed late into the night as he answered questions about the number of remaining tombstones, cemetery conditions, who to contact for access, and numerous other queries. Virtually everyone learned something about their family history through documents in the Polish State Archives and their local record office in their ancestral town, and conversations with the current residents, through documents at the Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw, and sometimes from tombstone inscriptions in neglected cemeteries. When Janet Greenberg joined the tour, her main goal was to visit Rzhowik, where her father was born, in Krynstał, where other family members lived. When she returned home, she had 8 hours of videotape documenting a remarkable journey into the past, during which she stood in the former Krasnow synagogue, now a shirt factory, located the remains of the Jewish cemetery, visited a local museum where Jewish items were brought out from a locked cabinet, and touched the signatures on documents of grandparents and great-grandparents long ago, but never forgotten. In addition to archival access and visits to ancestral towns, another special arrangement for this tour was hands-on access to the archival files at the Auschwitz Museum, not normally accessible to tour groups for research. The archives of Majan, the concentration camp in Lublin, also processed search requests for tour participants and provided an orientation lecture prior to the regularly scheduled tour. At the Auschwitz archives, it was a summer moment, as the tour participants went through the many file cards looking for their family name, hoping on one hand to find one, and on the other hand, not wishing to. There were tears and much introspection when the group was first confronted with the more than 2 million index cards neatly stored in long rows of file cabinets. Almost everyone found a record of a family member, someone with the same surname, and then ordered a copy of the Auschwitz file. Another example of the outstanding cooperation we received also occurred at Auschwitz. A national holiday had been declared a few months prior to our visit. When we arrived at Auschwitz, we were told the museum was open for tours, but the archives were closed. After some discussion, a telephone call was made to the home of the archivist. She came into her office and opened the archive especially for our group. There were many surprises on this tour. The existence of documents not destroyed, towns not wiped off the map, the outstanding cooperation of the archival personnel, and the genuine interest in our purpose. Throughout the tour, we met with members of the Polish community who were friendly, helpful, and invited us into their homes. While we were expected at the archives, it seemed that the staff went out of their way in their efforts and was somewhat embarrassed but sympathetic at the frequent emotional displays. Some were happy discoveries, while some documents and photographs brought forth tears. However, in the small towns, we were not expected, and at the genuine warmth of the people we met, who stopped what they were doing to spend hours with us in museums, poring over musty old record books, and just talking about the history of the local Jewish community, was something special that none of us will ever forget. The significance of this historic tour was the archival access and the cooperation. The documents were there for some, but the cooperation was there for everyone. And this tour was given by Miriam Weiner, the first board-certified Jewish genealogist in the United States, lectures on exploring Jewish roots and Holocaust research. Her syndicated column, Roots and Branches, appears in more than 90 newspapers, and also has co-authored the Encyclopedia of Jewish Genealogy. Well, that's really amazing. I mean, for any person that is excited, and I'm excited myself because I do have Polish roots, and who knows, maybe I could find some relatives there also. Do you think the Holocaust wiped out Jewish history? The Jewish people were wiped out, like we said. Very few Jews remain in Poland. But on the other hand, that there still is the history there to be explored and to be researched. Now, since we're talking about Europe, we'll stay in Europe for a while, and we're going to talk about wines. And where else better to talk about wines than the wines of France? And again, many people think, oh, kosher wine. That, remember, I always nickname it, sorry to say, grape syrup. That the wines are really not that good. But I'm wrong again. That was maybe many years ago. And there's actually many award-winning kosher wines. So let's look at a few and try to get our palate a little bit more sophisticated with kosher wines. To the average person, wine is synonymous with France. After all, the French have been mastering, perfecting, and very effectively promoting their wines for centuries on end. However, the prominent Jewish role in French winemaking has been largely overlooked. Not to mention our whole historical expertise since before Noah, and the art of fermenting grapes to warm the body and spirit. Interestingly, the Talmud tells us about the diverse wines that existed in Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, ranging from sweet to spice to aged. See, right from the beginning we were old hands at the game. On the long ago French scene, Jews brought their winemaking skills with them into Galut, into the exile, and were producing wines hundreds of years before the rule of the Franks, 9th century, from whom the country derived its name. And they continued some in large-scale operations. In fact, by the year 1040, virtually all the vineyards in the huge province of Champagne were under Jewish auspices. An extraordinary one was owned by the Rashi family, which gave rise to the legend of Rashi the winemaker. Then, among others, there were the Rothschilds, who were and continued to be famous for their vineyards and production. In addition, France always had numerous small wineries that nobody really heard of unless you were related to the winemaker or lived in the same town. One such operation is in Brno. It's currently run by Rev. Avraham Yosek, a Malamed, a teacher, as well as a winemaker. This venerable man looks like somebody you would imagine to have lived in the time of the Baal Shem Tov, the rabbi in the 18th century, with his big talus-cot and four-cornered garment with fringes and long flowing white beard. Though France had been his home for the past 40 years, he remains totally oblivious to the glamour of Paris et al. And doesn't speak a word of French. Well, maybe a bonjour, and he says that with a heavy Yiddish accent. Sounds impossible? Believe me, he manages it. A survivor of the Holocaust, he wound up in France where, through luck and pluck, he got into the wine business. The unusual circumstances began like this. After World War II, a 200-year-old deserted chateau, which had the remnants of a very impressive wine cellar, was turned into a yeshiva. Since kosher wine was scarce in war-ravaged France, Red Yosef decided that it was predestined that he should utilize the wine cellar and remedy the situation. He bought a load of grapes. It so happened these grapes were from Bordeaux. Not that it mattered to the pious Malamed. The truth is he didn't know Bordeaux from Brooklyn. Then, using the cellar facilities of the Chateau Yeshiva, lo and behold, the wine came out great. He figured that with the Torah classes and prayer groups upstairs, it was to be considered a great merit. And the resulting fermenting scent that continually permeated the chateau probably had a very nice effect on the students overhead. Anyway, no one complained. At first, Rabbi Aaron Yosef supplied wine to a select few, but the man grew, and now he has over 300 loyal customers, none of whom check his kosher certification or care about the vintage or packaging. Today, kosher wine is abundant in France, yet the Malamed's wine is all prepaid and by reserved order only. So you see that there is a little bit of special wines there in France, and it's really interesting, the Jewish source of the wines in that time, in Champagne, and the good wines. So we're connecting one thing to another. We went from Poland to France, and so we're talking about France wine. What else happens when you drink wine? Well, you become happy. So, of course, that's what we have for us now. We have an interview with Mark Weiner, a Jewish comedian. Far from the television cameras, the stage, the lights, the punchlines, and the laughter, the accoutrements of big-time showbiz comedy, there is time for reflection, for solemnity and thought about his God. Positive Jewish comedy is what I like to call my stuff, he said thoughtfully, as opposed to 99% of the Jewish comics out there who are performing. Mark Weiner, 38, is a stand-up comic and performance artist who, like far too few Jewish performers, has placed his religion solidly ahead of the bright lights. Negative comedy means stereotyping, he says. It's the Jews are lawyers, the Jews are cheap jokes. These Jewish comics get up on national TV and make fun of Judaism. I disagree with that. You have people out there who don't know anything about Judaism. They're just perpetuating these stupid stereotypes. His voice becomes animated, charged when he describes how indifferent, uncaring colleagues belittle his faith. You can't make Judaism the butt of jokes, he adds, easily regaining his composure. It can be a laughing matter, but amongst Jews, not when non-Jews see us ripping it apart. I really think these Jewish comics, no names, do more harm to Judaism than good. But Weiner does good. Raised in Mahopac, New York, and trained as a mime and juggler at the Celebration Mime Theater in Maine, Weiner took his act indoors to nightclubs and comedy clubs in 1978. I just enjoyed entertaining, he recalls. I was a juggler and street performer, and then to verbalize it, I became a comedian. It wasn't until 1983 that, as he recalls, I just started wanting to learn more about Judaism. I grew up with a very weak Jewish background. How weak was it? I had a surprise bar mitzvah. That's a joke. But seriously, I never knew about Shabbos or anything. With my background, it was like you were a Jew when you were inside the shul during services, but when you left, you were just like everyone else, and that's all there was to it. One day, Weiner happened to walk into Manhattan's Lincoln Square Synagogue and just really got interested in it. It was just what I needed at the time. I was rediscovering Judaism in a way I never learned about before. I felt kind of like there had to be more in my life than I was doing. I was looking for answers, deep answers. Professionally, good things were starting to happen too. After 2 appearances on NBC's Saturday Night Live and repeated dates at places like the Improv, the big time seemed to beckon. But then, having committed himself to becoming a Baal Tshuva, returning to classic Talmud traditionalist Judaism, he came to realize the price he would have to pay in a profession that lives and dies on Friday and Saturday nights. Once I became a Shabbos observer, I lost all my secular kabur because I couldn't work on Shabbos, he recalls. So I lost all that. I don't travel as much either, and I've given up a couple of TV pals because they were on Yontif. One was the match game. I was going to be one of the celebrity participants. I went for the audition and got it. Then they said they were filming in the second day of Rosh Hashanah. They said in LA we only keep 1 day. So that was that. I've got many more of those stories. Another involves a semi-regular stint on the TV show Comic Strip Live. I'm supposed to be on about every 6 weeks, he says, but now that daylight savings time has kicked in, I can't do it for 4 or 5 months. It tapes at 8 o'clock Saturday night. The remembrances come without regret, however. In remaining true to his faith at the expense of his career, Weiner seems to personify the teaching of Rabbi Shalom Dov Ber Schneerson, who wrote in his classic treatise Kuntras Hamayim, quote, "And matters of livelihood too, the truth is that each one knows that Hashem's blessing is all important. And whoever is a Jew never entertains the thought that his work is the source of his prosperity. He knows quite well that the bounty is of the Almighty's, who grants his livelihood through his efforts. It is the foolishness of the evil inclination that deludes him into not considering the truth of all this. Since the bestowal from above is of critical importance, he should not tolerate any obstacle or deficiency in fulfilling what God commands him. This may well mean that he will limit his activities in business, but what he does will be sufficient. Hashem will provide his sustenance through less striving. His limited labor will provide this instrument for the beneficence granted him." Weiner says his favorite humor is silly humor, listing as his comedy heroes clowns of renown Red Skelton and Jerry Lewis. "It's nice when you get goofy with the Jewish stuff," he says. "That's what I enjoy the most." Weiner has 2 acts, one for Jewish audience and another for the world at large. His secular act involves a puppet show, which himself is a leading character. It really has no pure point of view, he says. It's just pure entertainment. Before a Jewish audience, he becomes a storyteller, recounting the pains and pitfalls of the newly religious, like mistakenly placing a Torah crown on his head, or standing in the back of a synagogue and feeling supremely flattered when an entire congregation turned toward him and bowed at the end of the Shabbos prayer, L'cha Dodi, or being invited to a Shabbos meal for the first time. The host says, "Let's go wash." I snipped my armpits and thought to myself, "Wash? What, do I smell?" In my Jewish act, I'm talking about specific holidays and customs. A non-Jewish audience wouldn't understand it. Even in front of Jewish audiences, the weaker the background of the person, the less enjoyable it becomes because they don't get it. They don't get the little inside stuff. I don't mean to be inside. I try and make this Jewish show of mine as educational as possible, to teach about the customs and things in a non-threatening way. Weiner's act has also changed in other ways since becoming Baal Tshuva, he says. Once I became observant, I cleaned myself up. Not that I was even racy, although I did test the boundaries. But if you are an observant person, who, to whatever extent you watch what you say, my act is pretty clean, I think. Weiner says his wife, Sandy, doubles as his writing partner. The couple recently had their third child, Max. Their first son, Avi, is 5, and daughter, Rebecca, 3. The future? Weiner says he looks forward to doing lots more television work as well as performing before a swelling Jewish audience. And beyond that, he ponders eternity. Does God have a sense of humor? Of course, look at the world. That's what he plans to say when he stands before his Maker in the world to come. Will he go for a laugh, a gag, a puffet, a story? The comedian considers. I'm sure we'll schmooze a little bit afterwards, he says at last. But there are some serious things that have to be dealt with. And that, we thank you. We help let you